Oh yes, greetings. Another sit here. I've been waiting to show you the wonders of art. Yes, ahead of you lies a path of treachery, death, and cucumber punishment. Now if you so choose to repel the ordeal, the Scourgebringer Awaits.
This is Scourgebringer, a game released in late 2020 by Flying Oak Games, described as a fast-paced action roguelite platformer. I know, never heard of one of those before, but this is different, and easily one of, if not my favourite titles in the vast sea of roguelites. Scourgebringer claimed outstanding reviews, and with its tight controls, satisfying progression, and absolutely banging soundtrack, it no doubt deserves the countless amount of praise it received, and since then it's become a much more hidden gem in the indie scene. But why? The experience of playing is just packed with quality, and I wish it got more attention. Now, with this channel being as small as it is, me making Scourgebringer more popular has about the same chance of happening as me beating the game. But that doesn't stop me from talking about the gorgeous art direction. So let's take a look into the most beautiful game you've never seen. We begin our journey by taking a look at the world within the Scourgebringer monolith, the environment. This game uses colour to a masterful degree, with every environment feeling fresh, new, and equally interesting as the last. In this limited space, there are 5 realms to be explored.
Wait, aren't there 6 realms?
Shh, spoilers. And the main way they make these separate areas feel so distinct from each other, besides this playing when you jump through the portal, is the use of colour. The saturated neon green and rusty bronzes of the wasted pits radiate a completely different atmosphere to the unsettling fleshy pink nature of the living walls. This brings us to the first point, which is that every area has a defining hue, a colour that makes that area different, and this causes exploration to feel so unique and immersive. In addition, despite these drastic differences between environments, the appearance of every realm still follows a similar structure, and to see this, let's just use the first level, the Entangled Ingress, as an example. The background is dark, and this is true for all stages, which causes Kira, especially with her bright white hair, as well as the enemies, who are incredibly vibrant as well, to be readable above everything else. The main section of the level is a somewhat neutral tone, in this case a very muted azure hue, but a secondary accent colour, the vibrant warm green, sticks out in places such as this moss, or grass, or leaves. Oi! Stop that. This minimal palette makes the world feel monochromatic, which gives it a strong sense of atmosphere, while simultaneously keeping them visually interesting as accents are used to break up the neutral tones. Another benefit of this, which I've touched on a little bit already, is readability. The developer, Thomas Altenberger, stated in a message that the environment art is contrasted on purpose for the heavy action to be readable, and we can see that primary motive carry through. Due to this intentionally minimalistic, consistent palette, it's not hard to understand a room layout the instant you walk into it, which is especially important in a game which gives you about 0.3 seconds to react before you get hit with a... The environment design both looks gorgeous with its vibrant palettes, visually interesting due to the different colour themes for each realm, but also works synergistically with the gameplay, so you can immediately see what's happening in the fast-paced fights. The game also messes with colour in another notable way, which I haven't really seen done in many other titles. Since the background is so dark, flashing it red and orange when you take damage for a split second is a very unique and visible way to convey a slip-up or mishap. Probably one of the most creative ways I've seen a hit be communicated to a player. Now, let's move on. Time to look at the entities that live here, and how they're made to come alive. Let's uncover some of the mysteries of animation and design. Anticipation is one of the 12 core principles of animation, and is integral in order to project the idea of any motion, especially in the context of a game. If you've never really heard of the term before, anticipation is a prior action which forecasts a larger movement. Like this: anticipation and execution. I would argue that anticipation serves 2 main purposes. One is to create the feeling of realistic motion, heightening immersion. There's no punch without a wind-up, no jump without bending your knees, and no bullet without a weird laser light thing, I guess. Removing these first few moments of anticipation just doesn't feel right to us, especially if the motion is meant to be impactful. Maybe you can punch without a wind-up, but it'll be a lot less powerful and will therefore look much weaker. The same principle applies in-game. The first boss in Scourgebringer demonstrates this perfectly. Every single one of his attacks have a wind-up animation, the most evident ones being the punch and the ground slam. And this effect just sells the fact that these moves are powerful and will deal damage. No one's gonna just stand there when someone is above them, raising their fists. And this leads us onto the next purpose of anticipation: communication. The player is not just an observer in the game environment. They're actively responding to the events that unfold moment to moment. This means that, well, attacks should be predictable to some level. You can't dodge anything with any amount of skill if it just hits you with no prior warning. This is where the anticipation and telegraphing really plays the biggest role in games. Scourgebringer makes you, the player, feel in control. The game isn't only about killing enemies and bosses, but about mastering the movement, reading the gameplay loop, and fluidly chaining attacks together based on your situation and reflexes. I think. I don't know, I've just been spamming. Anyway, these massive exclamation points, although some would say unrealistic, make it very obvious that these annoying demon things are about to do something. So even on your first playthrough, you know to bolt to the other side of the room as fast as humanly possible. This cleverly creates a layer of skill and mastery to the gameplay, as the attacks are predictable, but not too predictable. In brief, the telegraphs allow you to plan for an encounter with some nasty bullets before it occurs. These animations make it so that your progression isn't just through the skill tree, but also through experience, rewarding you for learning the moveset and patterns for each and every creature in the world, making it extra satisfying when you kill a boss, after dying to it like 30 quintabajillion times before. No? Just me? Oh, okay. Alright. This logic is also the reason that the player character's animations have little to no anticipation. If you press this button knowing it would shoot your gun, you're not going to want some delay through anticipation, because that would both detract from the tight feeling gameplay, making it more sluggish and slow, as well as just being unnecessary. Maybe it's unrealistic, but in a game like this, the lack of anticipation for player control makes the experience wholly responsive and precise, which synergizes really nicely with the moveset. A final note on enemies in particular is the clear linking of design to functionality. Let me explain. People, just by being alive and humans, have some preconceived ideas of how physics and materials tend to act and work, and a good game developer, such as Flying Oak here, uses that to teach the player certain enemy characteristics without even having to say a word. This is often called show not tell, and it's used in a variety of media, be it novels, films, and yes, video games. In Scourgebringer, different enemies react differently to certain player actions, such as getting hit with a bullet. If I were to show you these two enemies, which would you say deflects the bullet, and which do you think gets hit? Exactly. It's entirely obvious to anyone that this guy is gonna get demolished instantly when faced with a small metal pellet, just because this enemy is designed to be shiny and sharp, while this one is designed like the meatloaf in a Vietnamese restaurant. And even if you didn't think of this mechanic before, seeing a bullet reflect off a robotic enemy won't seem out of place at all. In fact, it intrinsically teaches our small monkey brains that bullets will reflect off basically all of the metal critters we see in the game, while your gun is, evidently, much more effective against roast pork here. This principle isn't just used in this context, but basically everywhere. Bigger enemies, more health. Scarier enemies, scarier attacks. All of the green enemies in the 5th realm, for example, the old world, have these annoying boomerang bullets, while all of the red or orange ones don't. This game is completely full of these clever patterns, which it never outright tells you, leading to the player having natural growths in knowledge. This is the magic of the hidden tutorial. You learn without having to be thrown out of the zone or game loop with an annoying pop-up or anything. You just get this kind of information very visually. Right, that's most of the journey done. We've discovered how these elements, the environment and the entities living here, are intentionally crafted to aid the main focus, which is the gameplay. But there's one final ingredient that ties it all together, and that is... If you're a game dev or just familiar with games in general, you've most likely heard of the term game juice or feel. It refers to many aspects of game design, such as visual effects, sound, and animation, all contributing to the feedback and satisfying responsiveness of a game's interactions. Basically, the impact the player has on the environment. There isn't much to clearly define game feel, but it gives the player a sense of intrinsic reward and engagement for interacting with the game world. Put simply, it's just the feeling in your bones. For example, let's see how Scourgebringer enhances the feel of a simple action, such as stunning an enemy. Stripping away the layers, we can see that the action is a simple button press, leading to an enemy taking damage and being stunned, so cancelling its attack if it's charging up for one. This is completely functional, as in everything mechanically is working the way it does in game, but it just sucks. Like, objectively, this feels bad to do. There's no impact and no juice, which makes bullying Mr. Floaty Demon Head here way less fun than it could be. First step is to add visual feedback when you press the button, letting the player know that their input has been registered and executed. It looks extremely awkward for an enemy to get stunned, while the player doesn't seem to have done anything, so here. Let's add the animation in, and this is already looking 10 times better than it was. Next, we can add visual feedback to the reaction. The player is being animated, but the enemy isn't responding well at the moment, so here's a stun sprite for the enemy. And putting this in, we can see that we have the two main pillars for this interaction: input and response. This already adds impact and juice to the experience, but it's really still the bare minimum. How much further can we go? Well, let's speed through these effects. Let's add a hit flash. This has a similar effect to the stun sprite, where it's just even more response to the player's successful connection. And this one has the added effect of highlighting the given enemy you hit, making the interaction also give you necessary information. Helpful if your game is as chaotic as Scourgebringer. You also have these massive slash effects or particles across the enemy, to boost the juice even more. See how good that feels? In Scourgebringer, there's also a hit stop or hit lag, which is basically the game pausing for a few frames to create a sense of emphasis and impact for a given action, like an attack. This is very common in most fighting games, and it works well in most scenarios to give you that highlighted badass moment. The longer the freeze, the more powerful it feels. Until you overdo it, then it just looks like the game has crashed. Finally, the cherry on top is screen shake. This one is pretty self-explanatory. As I once heard from a famous developer, you can never have too much screen shake, I think. And there we have it. We went from this to this with just a few visual effects and carefully thought out decisions. We've transformed the experience of stunning an enemy with an attack massively, creating a more engaging and immersive feel. And if you look at the gameplay of Scourgebringer, you can see that this level of game juice has basically been added to every single interaction. And these small visual effects build up to just make this entire game feel incredible to play. Right, I've been throwing this word immersion around non-stop like a mediocre game review website just trying to hit all the buzzwords, but that's for a reason. And I think it's the most important message to take away from this video, and from Scourgebringer's visual design. And that is, immersion doesn't mean realism. In certain number of A's games, always emphasize realism and lighting. For the rich people at conventions to go, wow, immersive and awe-inspiringly real. But they just have a lot of money and can do stuff like that. Immersion, put simply, is just a deep mental involvement in a game world, and therefore more so links to how detailed or authentic it feels. You don't need fancy lighting and 3D cinematic graphics to create an engaging world, if you just create a very thought-out space for the player to exist in. Scourgebringer mixes dystopia elements with fantasy and magic, and you literally float upwards to be teleported to a blood lake with a blue bell-growing tree when you die, which is as far from real as you can get without delving into a fever dream, but the world still feels authentic and alive. Now, why is that? Well, I as the player can interact with most things. The grass moves under your feet, and vines or ropes swing out of the way. Heck, even the blood in the blood lake is like responding blood in a blood lake, and not just idle blood in a blood lake. There's a sense of permanence when you kill enemies. The spiderwebs move. They move when you touch them, and it all just ties together the fact that you're in a place which reacts to your presence, which is really how immersion is created. Hell, this game doesn't even have dynamic lighting or any fancy post-processing, and it still weaves together such a concrete experience. So you can learn a thing or two about feel and engagement from this. I hope I've convinced you. Go play Scourgebringer if you haven't already. It's difficult, but very worth it. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I owe you all a cookie, but I don't think this YouTube channel is making enough revenue for me to pay for all the shipping. So I kind of just have to give you a virtual one. I'm sorry. Oh, and just before I forget, thank you so much to fireb and wzium for sending me the gameplay footage that I used throughout the video. And with that, I think I'll end it here. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.